So welcome. Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce the topic today, integrating LWS into personal leadership development. I'm joined today by Mr. Philip Botha, an ICF master coach and leadership trainer with over 15 years of experience in personal leadership development. He is a catalyst for who supports authentic leadership and development and supports leaders on their journeys to transform themselves and their organizations. We're very happy to have you with us today. Philip, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into your insights into the LWS and how you integrate that tool into your leadership development, coaching, and practices, which we're all looking forward to. And by the way, it's probably one of the most frequent questions that we get is best practices of how to integrate these models and good data and information into a development journey and help leaders to understand this information and take it on board and develop. The other thing I'm excited about for this session is the fact that we have a chance to talk about the LWS, which is probably not a very well-known instrument, at least outside of the United States. If people are familiar with human synergistics individual level tools, especially for leadership development, they're probably familiar with the LSI or Lifestyles Inventory, or perhaps also our Leadership Impact or LI. But the LWS may be new to people, so I just wanted to sort of introduce it very briefly, just to say that if you're familiar with LSI, then you already have been a bit introduced to LWS. It's a very similar kind of instrument, really measuring the same things, these thinking and behavioral patterns using the same model and circumflex that HS uses across our tools. The main differences I would point out, for example, between LSI and LWS is firstly, the norm group or whom we're comparing ourselves to. So while LSI is designed to be very broad and applicable to a very diverse base of people, the LWS is specific to leadership. And I think that's important to point out, not only in terms of, the individual's responses are compared only to other individuals in leadership and senior management roles, but that the context of the report is specific to and sort of speaks to being a leader in an organization. And I guess that's the second difference I would point out briefly in the LWS is that the report for LWS is quite text-driven. It's something that we get a lot of positive feedback in terms of leaders who are able to read it, kind of understand the content without needing a lot of interpretation and sort of translation in terms of how to interpret and understand the profiles. So for those of you who may not have heard of LWS, that is the introduction that I'll give you today. And then let's turn it over to Philip Botha and his wonderful insights and practices and how that tool is used to develop leaders. Mr. Philip.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful to be here. Just touching in on what you just said, the reason why I enjoy using Leadership WorkStyles is because it helps leaders when they start with personal development or in a leadership workshop. It just becomes very easy for them to tune into it because it's really associated with the workplace, and it's easy for them to step into it. Obviously, there is a lot more behind it, and it really goes deep, but it's an easy connect for them. To start with, in case somebody is not aware of the models, I just want to give a quick overview of what I'll be covering in the session, and then just dive into a quick review of what the LWS report actually is. So that's the first point, is just a quick overview. Then I want to talk about a couple of concepts that are important to clarify before I talk about how to really integrate it in depth in leadership development. And that is, firstly, what is leadership impact? The connection between behaviors and values, and then also the connection between vulnerability, values, and behavior styles. Because it's important to understand those in order to understand the process that we take leaders through. And then what I'd like to do is to actually use an example and just to take you through how to approach it, because it touches in on the Leadership Styles workbook, but we take it in another direction, because when we do a personal development workshop or a leadership development workshop, we dive in a lot deeper and we need people to reflect. And that is, in essence, what this is about. So very briefly, for those of you who do not know the So Complex and the leadership or the behavior, human synergistics behavior styles, there are 12 behavior styles spread out on a so complex. And John, please, you know this 100 times better than I. Please feel free to correct me. But I just want to run through this very quickly. So first of all, humanistic, encouraging, affiliative, approval, conventional, dependent, avoidance, oppositional, power, competitive, perfectionistic, achievement, and self-actualizing. Now, each of these are very clearly and very well defined, and I'm not going to go into what they mean. If you're interested in that, then I really suggest that you get in touch with somebody at Human Synergistics or start reading in their material on the web. But it's how we apply this that I want to go through. Also, some of you may not be familiar with the reports. I just want to run through very briefly what are the essential elements in the report. So first of all, there is a self-perceptions summary. So different to the other reports, you have a very strong text content. As John said earlier, you really don't need to go into workbooks and sort of pull out what is relevant for you. Everything is written specifically for you, and that's one of the great things about LWS. It's all very specific for you. So you have the self-perceptions summary with your potential strengths, potential counterproductive tendencies, and that obviously relates to your self-profile. Secondly, you have the perceptions of others. And similarly to the self-perception, you have potential strengths and you have potential counterproductive tendencies. And then obviously, you have the profiles, the self-profile and the description by others profile. So if you look at that, it looks very similar to LSI or any of the other products, but it really is in how it is presented and how easy it is for a manager to access the content in the report that makes it different. The next section is the detail. So as I said before, everything that I've mentioned before, those are summaries, but there is an in-depth section on the task level and an in-depth section on the teams level. The content is great and it's very specific. And then you also have suggestions for development. So what I like about this is a leader can take whatever you're doing with the content, whether it's in a workshop or whether it's in a coaching program, they can always go in and using the workbook, which is here, they can also work with it themselves. There is so much depth in there, it's impossible to capture it all. But another thing that is very different about the LWS is there is space for participants to write comments. And these comments are really important because what I find very often is in a workshop or in coaching, people find it very difficult to find examples of their behavior, let alone what behavior is. But the ability to have these very clear comments, one can relate directly back to the content in the report. And the essential things somehow are always in there. So this is really very, very valuable. The workbook, as I've said, is valuable because it really helps you develop a very clear and finite action plan. And John, just a comment, I love the action plan in this workbook. It really is great.
Good, thank you. I can't take credit for it, but I've get good feedback on that as well. It's nice to have that detail and structure. Yeah.
So just to step away from the LWS report, I just want to briefly talk about leadership impact. Now, yes, human synergistics have a great product, Leadership Impact, where they measure leadership impact. When I talk about leadership impact, I talk about the impact that we have on people on an interpersonal level, because that is what shifts in how they show up as part of a team or in following someone. So very briefly, a leader aligns. If a leader is not able to align the people that follow, he or she will never be a great leader. So it's what they do, how they do, for the impact that comes out of it. So alignment is vital. The same with inspiration. If a leader is not able to inspire people, why should they follow him? Connect. John and I were talking about this earlier. If a leader is not able to build connection between people, between themselves and people, what happens? From my perspective, that's really when we are in red or green behavior, because if we can't connect, we definitely cannot align, and we definitely cannot inspire. And connection is, for me, one of the base needs that we have as people. So the better or the greater a leader is in terms of building connection, the greater the leader. That's my personal opinion. And then also to unify people. So in order to unify, obviously, we need to be able to align, we need to be able to connect, we need to be able to inspire. And then motivate, empower, and enthuse. If people are not enthusiastic about where they are going, that's a leadership issue. If we are not able to empower the people from a leadership perspective, that will have a real impact on the performance that we will have at the end of the day. And I don't think I need to say anything about motivation. So when I talk about leadership impact, this is essentially what we want to see from great leadership. I want to talk about values. And values is not a science, but this is from my own observation in coaching from the last 18 years. And the way that I describe it is literally from what I've seen and what I've experienced in coaching as well as in workshops. So I define personal values. Personal values are those values that give us a unique personality. That is the essence of who we are and of what we stand for. So let's say, for instance, integrity, or exploring, or innovation, or being of service. How we show up in alignment with these values is essentially what makes us as people, but also what defines us as leaders. Now, the next element, and this is what I call societal values. And these values I identified after literally 15 years of doing hundreds of workshops. And in a workshop, I always do use a tool that I call rules of engagement. And what I discovered is that there are essentially 7 values that people need to be able to work together, to trust each other, and to collaborate. And these are respect, honesty, openness, trust, consideration, and fairness. And you can actually add confidentiality to that, because if people don't feel that others will deal with what they say with confidentiality, they cannot trust. So that is just from experience. Now, yes, it's always possible that in your personal values, trust may be a personal value as well. But this is something that transcends our personal, let's say, building blocks. This is something that we all share. And it's important that we are able to respect them, build them, and align with them. Then beliefs. Whether they are beliefs or self-limiting beliefs, our beliefs are tied to our values. And they either express our values or they denigrate our values. So, for instance, just taking simple examples, I can deliver great presentations, or I can embrace and drive change. If we don't believe something, it becomes very difficult to actually live it and behave in accordance with it. And that brings me to the last one. I can't get people to listen to me. That's an example of a self-limiting belief. And if that is a belief, nothing in the world will enable me to do that. You know, beliefs drive what happens in the world. And if you go back to, I think it was in '64 when Banner broke the 4-minute mile for the first time. It had never been done in history. But within a space of months, 5 or 6 others were able to break the 4-minute barrier as well, simply because they believed that it is possible. So in this instance, from a leadership perspective, our values and our beliefs are vital, and our awareness of that is just as important. So, having spoken about values, how do values and beliefs hang together? So, from my perspective, behavior is a choice. And sometimes a choice is not a conscious choice. Doing nothing is also a choice, because I choose not to build awareness. I choose not to do anything. But behavior can have a positive expression, like, for instance, achievement as a achievement as a value will have a positive expression in the way that we show up. But a value also has a shadow expression in that behavior. And in, for instance, taking achievement, the shadow expression of that would be greed. So if I'm not aware of how I behave in alignment with my values, it is very easy for me to start behaving in alignment with the shadow side of a behavior. So for instance, instead of really focusing on achievement as a value, now all I started focusing on is how much money can I make? How much profit can I make? And that very quickly becomes a snowball, in the sense of now it's only about money. It's not about the value. So it's important to understand that a value can have a positive expression, but if we're not aware of our values and we don't keep that awareness alive, a value can also have a negative expression. In my experience, it's really difficult for people to differentiate between doing and behaving. If I ask people in a workshop, describe a behavior, most often they'll come with an opinion. And if you push them, they'll come to something that describes doing. But to really develop yourself, it's important to be able to differentiate and to describe behavior. So what do I mean with that? And here is a real example from one of the people that I've worked with, is if I ask myself, what did I do? And the behavior style is avoidance, this person said, I accept decisions or guidelines even if I don't think they're right. Or I allow decisions to be made by superiors. If we then ask them, so what do you need to do if you want to be constructive? There is actually a reaction, but the reaction is actually quite defensive. Well, I need to fight decisions I don't like. Or I need to make decisions myself and not ask others. And that happens because we look at it from a doing point of view without really understanding what's the difference between doing and behaving. So how can I do it differently? And it's the how that makes a difference. Because if I'm clear in this example of who has the authority to make a decision, now I can start thinking about how can I try to influence a decision before it is made? Or how can I communicate decisions where we were not able to influence that, so that people don't perceive me just as falling over and accepting decisions. So, and this is not that easy, because people really need to understand for themselves and talk about it and reflect on it to be able to distinguish for themselves their own doing and behavior. And this brings me back to the circumplex. Because if we look at the circumplex, we have the three clear styles: constructive, passive defensive, and aggressive defensive. And if we look at one of the core definitions of the circumplex, the blue styles satisfy our higher order needs. And the red and the green styles, our lower order needs, security. And this obviously ties in with everything that we know about Maslow. But for me, one of the insights that I've had in the work that I've been doing was bringing this into connection with, I'm not sure if you've seen Brené Brown's work or her videos, is her concept of vulnerability. And if we start reflecting on that, our security needs are very strongly related to the vulnerability, the insecurity, and the fear that we feel subconsciously without realizing that. And for me personally, that was a real insight, because we don't want to feel vulnerable. We regard that as a weakness. So we don't show it to others and we don't show it to ourselves. The point is that if we don't build the awareness for our own vulnerability or our own insecurity, it is literally impossible to move away from red or green behavior. Because our instinct is fight or flight. And that is the essence, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the essence of what red or green behavior is. That's how we protect ourselves. And the important thing is that if this is instinct, if we don't do anything, that's how we're going to behave. And I need to somehow overcome that instinct, and that is really not easy. So following on what Brené Brown says, that to be able to deal with vulnerability, I need to build courage, because courage dissolves vulnerability, which begs the question, where do I get courage from? And if you are not clear what you stand for, you can't have courage. So this is where we get back to values. Because the stronger my awareness of my values, the stronger I reflect on my values, the greater my courage, because I know what I stand for. And that is what helps me overcome the vulnerability, the insecurity, or even the fear that I feel. And it is that courage that helps me overcome behaving according to instinct and then making a conscious choice. Hold on, I can do this in a different way. And that process is really not easy. And we can talk about it and understand it on a cognitive level, but it's only when you really start diving into it and understanding your own vulnerability, your own values, that you can really start feeling, how does it happen? Because it's about the eye level, it's about the personal level. It's not about understanding. So being able to, through your values, build courage, that is what allows you to build connection with others. And that is then what builds the connection to be able to move into construction behavior. And this process is what we want to support when we integrate LWS into personal development, because LWS gives us great insight into what are our values and where do we want to be in our values. And it's now up to us to start understanding that, so let's say, using an example, when I'm in avoidance, and when I'm using this example for avoidance, what is actually the vulnerability in that moment? Because if I can delve into it and I can own it, and I can then build my values, I'm able to then start overcoming it. And actually, logically, the minute I start building my values and building courage and building connection, wow, I'm also building self-actualization in that moment. So when we work, or when I work with LWS in a profile, we essentially start with the same way that the workbook actually starts. So let's just look at here at a specific example. In this example, on their own profile, there is very strong blue and very strong green in the other's profile. And the interesting thing is that in the own profile, self-actualization is the strongest, but in the other's profile, avoidance is the strongest. So here is a blind spot that if this person is able to overcome it, they're actually able to harness and really live that self-actualization that they have in their intention to behave. So using the self-perception summary, and this is very similar to the workbook, is literally to select the potential strengths. Now, I've just selected 2 here that are relevant as an example, and to elect 2 potential counterproductive tendencies. That relates back to the content of the workbook, but also later back to the detail of the workbook and anchors the behaviors that they want to work with. And then very much the same process with others' perception. Let's say in this example, highly motivated to succeed, able to direct others when conditions require authoritative action. And counterproductive tendencies may find it difficult to trust others. A forceful style may antagonize others. And then following on that, and this is where we take a slightly different approach. And the first is that, default behaviors, avoidance, and achievement is in the feedback model that I enjoy using. There are 3 elements, and the essence of it is what I want to see. Now, if I talk about what I want to see, I'm very much in behavior, because if I see somebody, I see their behavior, and I need that visual impact to be able to describe what is happening. So on the first level, what I want to see even more of in this, let's say this was my profile, what I want to see even more of is defines what is strong and what I can always continue building out. So these are my strengths. I have it, but I can always build it, continue building it out, because we cannot only work on what's wrong. So in this instance, self-actualization and achievement is already strong. And I actually ask people to put an arrow, a skew arrow, because every time they come back to the profile, it's very easy to get back into, this is my feedback to myself. This is what I want to achieve with these behaviors. And then secondly is, what do I want to see less of? So this is what is strong and what is not constructive to me. So for example, avoidance, approval, dependent, power, and competitive. Those are the important ones that I want to see less of. Now, the others I left out because, you know, maybe I can work at them at a later stage, but they are not that relevant right now. And then finally, what I want to start seeing, which means what is weak, non-existent, but this is really where I need to start working on very strongly. And that is as an arrow up. And in this instance, that would be affiliative and humanistic encouraging. So this helps me have a perspective on, okay, this is what I want to have happen in the future. And from this, we move on to development areas. Now, a development area is a combination of profiles that have a connection with each other. In LWS, we also have clusters that I don't want to go deeper into, but as a coach, if you are certified in LWS, you also have access to the clusters, so you're able to also use these clusters, because a cluster can also have a specific correlation in the way that somebody shows up. So in this example, here is an example of a development area: avoidance and self-actualization. There is a clear correlation between the two. If I want to change the one, I also need to work with the other. A second example is dependent and achievement. These are just the simple correlations, just to keep it simple. And then the third one is a little bit more complex. Approval, power, and affiliative. Now, if I want to work on building affiliative, I also need to work with approval, because there is a correlation between those. But there is also a correlation with power. So if I want to work from a leadership perspective and I want to build affiliative, I need to consider both of those when I work with it deeper. So let's take one example and move it deeper. And in this example I'm taking is affiliative and self-actualization, and I'm working with a specific example that I took from one of my workshops. And I'm not going to read through everything, but this is very clearly comes from a comment or an example of a comment in terms of, this is what is great about the leader, but also you have these strengths, but, and I'm just reading the last part, we had, let's see, I think you can use these strengths, especially your clear overall vision, attitude, and value orientation, and your passionate optimism. Even more when the team is unsure which way to go. We had many such uncertainties in the run-up to the launch, talking about a specific situation, where it was sometimes difficult to choose a path and pursue it vigorously. A hesitant approach led to indifference and demotivation for some. Now, when following it up with this person, he or she was able to very clearly come to connect that to avoidance, and avoidance to decision making. And this is the example that I want to follow through, how we can then integrate LWS into personal development. To get to what we need to do, I just need to also explain the model. Now, when I started coaching, one of the first models that I learned was the very simple model be, do, have. That we don't coach on the have level, we don't coach on the do level, we coach on the being level. That is how we are able to really enable people to create the future that they want. Now, working with other clients like Excellent since then, that model has become much more important for me. And for me, this is a fundamental model that you need to understand, whether you're working with yourself or whether you're supporting others. And in essence, if I want to have something, I obviously need to do something. But with this model, if I'm able to first define for myself and choose how I want to be, then that already helps me be a lot clearer about how I want to do in order to get where I want. The point about the iceberg is that the only thing that is visible, the only thing that we know is what we want to have. And everything else is in the dark. So if I want to start doing, I need to choose between a myriad of things. But I need to dive down and start discovering what would be the best way to do it. And what the model tells us, you have to dive even further to first find out is, how do you want to be when you're going to do this? So everything that is below the waterline is what we need to discover for ourselves. So in essence, this is about awareness. Because if we don't build awareness of all these elements and all these levels, it's not going to take us anywhere. So what we want to have on the I, we, it level, because we can break it down even further. On the doing level, we're talking about skills, or we're talking about behavior. There are other things that are also involved here, but these are the essential things that we're talking about. And then finally, when we're talking about the being level, we are talking about concepts like mindsets. We're talking about life purpose. We are talking about values. We are talking about fears and needs. So it becomes quite complex, but very rewarding if you start reflecting on that. And when you take the time and you make the effort, that really helps you get, and in my experience, way more than you actually originally wanted. So how can we apply this in the sense of behavior using the LWS? Well, first of all, what we want to have is an impact. That's why we are doing this. What the LWS tells us, it gives us our behavior. And what we now need to do from this behavior is start working out for us, for ourselves, is what is the subconscious principle that I've developed for myself that makes this behavior logical? And then, once I have that, what is the belief that this principle is based on? Because there is some belief subconsciously that I have that this is the right way to go. And then what is the mindset that I'm in? Now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with mindsets, but if you are not, I would really suggest that you check up on the mindsets as described by Fred Kaufman in Conscious Business. That is essentially the mindsets that I work with: knower, learner, and victim player. And then values. How aware am I of my values, and what role do my values play, consciously or subconsciously, in this instance? And then finally, what are my deepest needs and what are my deepest fears? So this really goes down deep. And what's really important is if you don't create a space where people feel safe, it becomes really difficult for them to go down to this deep level, because I promise you 99% of people have never thought about the deepest needs or the deepest fears. And most people, if you ask them, have not worked on their values. They may have an idea of what they are, but most people have never worked on them. And if you ask people what mindsets are, the descriptions that you have sometimes are very hairy. So it's important that people understand exactly what you mean with these concepts before they start developing their own. So let's move into an example. And in this example, I'm using an actual example. So first of all, the impact is, and this comes from the comments that were written, my team perceived me as being too reserved towards superiors and too worried about their judgment and criticism. Superiors perceive me as insecure in my role and tense. Now, yes, this is the person's perception of the impact that he has, but from his perception, people are demotivated, they don't trust, and they're not aligned. Now, the behavior that we want to work with in this instance is avoidance that we want to reduce. So working with the behavior style and the example of his behavior is to achieve targets and guarantee support from above. I quickly accept guidelines and guidance without too much question. Now, this describes how it is done. It can be much more specific in a specific example, but this has been reduced to a general behavior that happens very often. Now, the person then developed this principle of, I don't want to be a troublemaker. I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker. So it's better to keep support and get on with it than fight battles I can't win. So that's an internal subconscious logic of why I need to do this. From a belief point of view is, if I question guidelines too much, I will lose acceptance and support, and we won't achieve our goals. Now, the mindset is a victim, giving away responsibility. I can't take responsibility for this. The values, respect, loyalty, appreciation, trust, and creating performance are tied in indirectly. So if we take respect, there is an inherent respect for supervisors, for superiors, that is indirect. If you read that from the bottom to the top, there is also a certain loyalty that subconsciously, if I question, I'm not being loyal. Of trust. So I can't question because then I break trust. Now, this is not constructive. It's more a shadow side of the value that comes in here. But this is why it becomes logical that I need to do this. It's the right thing for me to do. What's really important is diving down deeper is the essential need for this person is to belong and to be accepted. And the fear is the fear of failure. Now, if we read it from the bottom, that I can't fail and I need to be accepted. So I need to make sure that, and this is subconsciously because this is not a constructive and aware way of building the values, I give away responsibility because I still want to respect. And I need to respect my superiors. And now it becomes a lot easier to say, I can't question guidelines because we won't support and achieve our goals. Performance is important. Respect is important. Loyalty is important. And that's how we get to the top. It sounds easy to run through this in a few minutes. But developing this takes time and reflection and conversations. So people start at the top and they start working down. They get to a block and they go back and they go back. So it literally is running this through over and over and focusing on one iceberg at a time. And then slowly it starts becoming clearer and clearer. And then, wow, when they run it from the bottom to the top, all of a sudden they understand what it is that actually moves them to behave in a certain way. Now, where do we want to go? And again, we use the iceberg, but we move from the bottom to the top. And now we start at the bottom where we ended. And in this example, we want to work with self-actualization and achievement that we want to continue building. Now, keeping with the needs and fears, the fear of failure, but in developing the values, we then come to the understanding that actually there is a deeper need than the need to be accepted by others. And that deeper need is to be accepted by myself. But that only happens if you really have started work on values and developing those values. And the strange thing is that once you do that and you accept yourself, the need to be accepted by others becomes irrelevant because others accept you for what you are, because you're being true to yourself. Now the values are incorporated in a very conscious, aware way. And in this instance, we also work with life purpose. And for this specific person, the life purpose was, I am the spark that inspires others to create and shape. Now, there is a very clear energy, and that this person can channel and help others to connect with, that wasn't coming through in the iceberg as is. And now also working with the mindset of, I take responsibility to influence decision making. There is a very different power in this, because now I want to do everything in alignment with my values, in alignment with my purpose, and in alignment with the mindset that I want to choose. And now I can choose what I want to believe because I know what I stand for. So in this specific example, I believe that if I can show potential consequences in advance rather than after the fact, I can shape relevant change. So there is doing, but there is also a way of doing in this belief. And it's very aligned with the purpose and with the values. And the behavior is, before they are taken, I can communicate timely, constructively, and respectfully to take influence on significant decisions or guidelines that have an impact. I'm transparent about decision making and our ability to influence that. Now, this becomes logical. And if you start looking at self-actualization and achievement, you can find that in the behavior that is described in that. And then looking to what is the impact that I want to have. I want to have the perception as a colleague and a leader that is influential and trustworthy, who motivates me to participate in change, inspires me to develop new ideas myself, empowers other people to create change and achieve. And that is, in essence, is it. It looks simple, but it really takes time and reflection and a lot of self-reflection and conversations to be able to develop that. And now when the person goes back and starts working with the rest of the detail in the LWS, it now becomes logical that this is what I can do and this is where I can be. So John, that's it from me.
Well, thank you so much. That is fantastic insights, and I agree with everything that you're saying. It's really cool to see. I mean, one of the things I always talk to about with clients is that as useful and helpful and accurate as the LWS is, it's really just part of a bigger process of creating change. And we talk about that a lot in terms of culture, which we work in that area quite frequently. These are journeys that we're embarking
Mhm.
upon. It's not about any one report either, telling you everything you need to know or creating change. One of the other things I like to say is, even though these reports are wonderful, they don't actually create the change. That's something that the participants have to do, the leaders have to do themselves, and it's just really cool to see how that's put into a logical process that people can work through for themselves, based on some good measurement and data that we can rely upon, and reflect upon. Thank you very much. This is it's great insights.
You're welcome. Your choice of the word journey is absolutely vital because this is what people see, what they experience. And a journey is never easy. There are many, many uphills in that journey. But what is amazing to see is that at the end of the journey,
Mm,
how people perceive what they're able to do in the future.
yes,
And that is without LWS as a tool,
right.
that really would not be possible.
Yeah, well, that connects directly to one of my questions that I had for you, because a lot of times when I talk to clients who are thinking about using LWS in their organizations and with their leaders and so on, a lot of questions that I get is sort of, when is this going to start working? How do we know this is paying off? Those sorts of things. So, how do you, I guess the question is, how do you encourage that? How do you, with leaders, encourage that kind of long-term commitment to growth and development? Everyone seems to be looking for quick fixes and silver bullets. And this, as we talked about, this kind of change is a journey. So how do we encourage them to embark on that journey, invest in that, and continue taking those steps forward?
Uh, it's a difficult question. If I run a workshop with 12 people,
Yeah,
you can take a horse to water, but you cannot force it to drink. I would say generally one or two people don't want to get it and will
yeah,
not get it. Um, some people will get it, but there will always be 4 or 5 who are truly inspired about this and really get into it, and they are the people who create change in an organization. And from my perspective, you need to give people the same opportunities, the same space,
mm,
but it's also about choice.
indeed.
What, however, is important is that after a program like this, there needs to be a support program so that they're able to support each other in continuing to work with us, in the sense of these are the achievements I've had, these are the goals that I set for the future, so that they continue feeding back, but also learn from others
Hmm.
what their journey is, what their insights are, so that they can incorporate that. And that's essential to keep it alive.
Yeah, very nice. Very, very well put. Another question that I had with regard to LWS is surprises. So one of the things I usually find and keep hearing from clients when they use that instrument is that a lot of the feedback and data and profiles that are in the report, are very helpful and very accurate, but when they sort of reflect on things, it's most of it is certainly things that they can recognize in themselves. It's not a big surprise, I guess, but I also find that there are surprises in reports, and there are things that people really didn't expect and
Mhm.
didn't see coming. Yeah, do you find this as well? And is there any sort of pattern or anything you find that surprises leaders about what they find in those reports?
I don't think there is any specific pattern. People are surprised in a positive sense. They're also surprised by mindsets.
Mm,
By blind spots. But the interesting thing is sometimes they have to swallow really deeply. And that is what gives them the motivation to, okay, I need to lick this.
yeah,
And those blind spots are never a complete surprise. Never a complete surprise. The the one thing that I do notice sometimes is that if people have a really red profile and there's little blue in their personal profile,
mm,
the first reaction is still there's something wrong with the model.
yeah,
I'm not like that.
yeah,
But again, that's a choice,
yes.
and that's part of the journey that they have to go on.
Yeah, and that's also part of why I really actually like and appreciate, and thank you for mentioning it, the open-ended comments that people can provide at the end of the
Yeah.
report, because I've noticed that pattern as well. As much as in certain cases we really want to say, this report is wrong and the must be inaccurate and profile is then they sort of get to those comments at the back, and they're so clearly connected to what we've just been looking at
Mhm.
in the data and some profiles that it makes it very hard to ignore the fact that what's in the report is accurate. And I always say those comments really add a lot of color to the data points, I guess, that we're giving people, and help them to understand the context. That seems to help, that consistency of
Absolutely.
yeah.
That also helps them take ownership of their profile, even though sometimes it's difficult.
Yes, indeed. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Another question I had, and this is one that comes up so frequently today, is with regard to virtual coaching, the whole new work COVID type situation. How has that affected your coaching? How does that affect the maybe the method process by which you do this? Any insights for us there on best practices?
From my perspective, 98% of my coaching was always virtual.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's
Very
always
cool.
been virtual. And for me,
Mhm.
the most effective coaching is actually by phone
Oh wow.
because you don't have any visuals that distract you. And you're really focused on listening.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think that's the first time I've heard that, but I like the idea.
If
Absolutely.
you, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure most of you have in workshops or wherever heard that 80% of the information that we take in is visual
Yes.
and 20% is audio. Well, that makes listening really difficult. But if you're only on the phone,
Yeah.
you have to change that subconsciously. And you really start listening at a level that you cannot listen on if you are watching a video or if you are in person. So yes, I do coaching over Zoom, but I prefer actually to do it on the phone.
It's a very interesting point. This is reminding me of like a counseling coaching type setting where we're sitting in a couch looking away from
Yeah.
the counselor, just focusing on the thoughts and words. That's very interesting insight. Thank you.
And coming back to it also builds connection because you're not reacting to what you're seeing, you are reacting to what you are hearing.
Yeah.
And that is what makes the person feel heard.
Yeah. Very nice. All right. I think the last question that I have for you. One of the things I notice with the clients and leaders who use our tools is typically once they have sort of get into it, if you will, get themselves into the pool, they realize the water's not so cold, and they really acclimate to this, and they get excited about it, and so on. The hesitation seems to be getting in the first place. So anyway, any recommendations from you on leaders who are considering using LWS for the first time? Maybe they're getting a hold of their report and going to look at that for the first time.
Well, what you're describing is we're back in vulnerability.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
literally is what's important for you. You know, what's important for you if you don't do anything? What's important for you if you don't do what's a problem for you if you don't do anything?
Right.
It comes back to your own perception of values.
Yes. Yes.
But that's a
Yeah.
process
And
that you obviously need to lead people through. You can't
yes,
expect
indeed.
them to just come up with it themselves.
Yeah, and it does take support. Yeah, it seems to be that step between, maintaining the status quo and doing what I've always done, which has managed to get me by, versus really breaking out of the mold and trying to do things differently. And like you said, work towards, and that's a huge topic that is really important, is working towards values. So much of what we talk about is, understanding, and we talk about this more maybe directly with other tools like leadership impact or the culture instruments, where we talk specifically about what are the values, what should be going on, how should leaders behave here, and capturing that so that we can use that as a direct sort of mirror to compare
Mhm.
ourselves. So but and to be honest with you, human synergistics created that methodology, or created the tools capturing those values, specifically because without that, we found it very difficult to get people to break out of that mold and to do things differently and
Yeah,
realize that things can change, and have the courage to take those steps.
absolutely.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, thank you so much for the insights.